Kleber Miller, thank you for joining us at the Texas Law Center and giving us some time to hear from you today. I want to ask you at the outset, what is it that made you want to be a lawyer in the first place? Tell us how you came to that decision.
Well, when I was in high school, I stumbled into being on the debate team. And I had a debate coach that I thought highly of, and after I did some debating for a while, he suggested that I ought to think about maybe going to law school. So I wandered down to the courthouse one day and saw a couple of trials going on, and it looked like they were doing something that I would enjoy. And that, along the way, after I went to the university, I equivocated 2 or 3 times. I thought about some other things I might like to do, but that's where I first got started, and I really was always on the track to be a lawyer.
There's always some teacher back there in our background, isn't
Yeah.
there? Tell us where you grew up and a little bit about the influences in your early life that have influenced your career.
Well, I grew up in Austin, lived in the country outside of Austin in a little country area called Go Valley, which is down on the Colorado River, and went to a country school where I frequently rode a horse to school, and then moved into town and went to Allen Junior High and Austin High School back in the days when there was only one high school here, and grew up in the shadow of university. My grandfather's old home was now where the LBJ school is. So I grew up literally looking out on the University of Texas, and I never considered going anywhere else.
So it was a natural place for you
It was a natural evolution for me to grow up and go to school here.
What did you study while you were at the university?
Well, I got out of the Navy, and they had a special program for returning veterans where you could go into law school with only 60 hours. You didn't have to have a major, and you did not get an undergraduate degree. So I just took some general education courses and went into law school after 60 hours. And I only have a law degree. I do not have an undergraduate degree. So I did not have an undergraduate emphasis on anything.
Well, it seems like you've done pretty well with just that one degree.
Well, nobody ever challenged me because of that.
So, tell us about your Navy career. What years were you in the service?
Went in the Navy in 1943, fresh out of high school. Thought I was going to win the war single-handedly. Turned out I didn't do any fighting. Spent 3 years in the South Pacific and came back and actually enrolled in the university while I was on leave from the Navy. Went back and got discharged and came back and started school. So I spent 3 years in the Navy.
What did you take from that Navy experience that helped you in your legal career?
Well, I took a lot of growing up, a lot of maturing, and I saw enough of what was going on in the world and the different kinds of people that I ran into to make me really become convinced that I wanted to get an education and wanted to do something with my life other than just what I was doing in the Navy.
When you came back, you went to the University of Texas Law School?
Yes.
Who were some of your professors that you remember? And
I had a professor named Joe Witherspoon, who was one of the brightest people I've ever been in class with and whom I could never understand. He talked so far over my head, I never could figure out what he was talking about. And Paige Keaton came along right at the end of my career. I had a study group under him, but I never did actually have a class under him. So those are some of the ones I remember.
who were some of the people you were in school with that you followed throughout your career?
Well, I was in school with a great many of them are dead. I was very close friends with Joe Bruce Cunningham. I don't know whether he came from Big Spring, Texas. Out there and practiced with Jimmy Little for a while. Bill Sarsgaard was a very close friend of mine. Beverly Potoff in Abilene is the permanent secretary of our class, and she was a good friend of mine, and we were on the university debate team together. Bobby Blumenthal partner in the Carrington Coleman firm in Dallas, and I were debate partners, and been friends over the years. And so those are some of the people.
So you grew up you liked arguing.
Yes, I've argued ever since I can remember.
Okay. When you got out of law school, how did you get started in your career?
Well, I wanted to stay in Austin, and jobs were pretty scarce in those days. And so I got a job as an assistant district attorney under Bob Long. And there were only 3 of us in the DA's office at that time, and I was in charge of the domestic relations part of it. So I spent all day long listening to ladies explain to me why their husbands ought to be skinned alive for not paying their child support or not taking care of their kids. And while I was in the district attorney's office, one of these friends that I mentioned, Bill Sarsgaard, who had gone to Fort Worth to practice and was with a firm that inherited the Santa Fe Railroad account, and overnight they inherited about 100 trial files, and they needed somebody interested in doing trial work, and he called me and asked me if I'd be interested in moving to Fort Worth. And I went up and talked to him, and at first said no, couldn't leave Austin, and tossed and turned for about 3 nights and called them back and said, is that still open? And they said yes. So I went to Fort Worth and have never regretted it.
Been there ever since.
Been wonderful.
Is it the same firm that you're still with?
No, that firm, the 2 senior partners in that firm split in 1954. I moved there in January of 1952. 1954, the 2 senior partners split up, and I went with the partner that I was doing the most work for, and we formed a 4-man firm of our own in 1954, and I haven't changed location since that time.
Well, you've been loyal
Well,
since 1954.
Nobody else would have me.
Well, your firm is Shannon Gracie Ratliff and Miller.
Yes.
That's still the name?
Yes.
So great Fort Worth.
It's
firm.
gone through some different mutations over that time, but I've always been with a group that started in 1954.
Well, who were the lawyers that you most admired when you were a young lawyer that you wanted to be like?
Well, the senior lawyer of that group that I went with, a lawyer named Alan Crowley, he's a past president of the State Bar of Texas, and I admired him greatly. He was my mentor. He gave me the opportunity to work with him and learn about trying lawsuits, and he had a great outlook that I learned a lot from. He was a tremendous influence in my life, and I'd say the strongest influence in my legal career.
You know, it's interesting. You said he gave you the opportunity to work with him. Is there a difference between working with a lawyer and for a lawyer?
Well, he always said that I was working with him, and I kind of liked that. I really carried his briefcase.
Sounds like a pretty good briefcase to carry.
He was a fine, fine gentleman.
Now, have you done trial work your entire career?
Yes.
And have you enjoyed that life?
When I was in the district attorney's office in Austin, they would let you have a practice on the side in those days. So I had an office in downtown Austin. And my very first client was a lady who brought in an abstract to be examined, and she was selling a piece of property. I didn't know an abstract from a 3-legged dog. And so I looked at it and turned it upside down and thumbed around on it and tried to decide what in the world am I supposed to do with this. So I finally, at the very back of it, saw that the Austin National Bank had made a loan on this property, and I happened to know the lawyer who represented the Austin National Bank. I called him up and explained my plight, and he said, I've got a title opinion. Would you like to have it? And he was gracious enough to let me have it and said, all you need to do is check to see whether anything's been filed since, and there hadn't been. So I decided right then I didn't know how to do anything except what I was doing, which was learning how to get along in the courtroom.
Has your practice been primarily defense side, both types?
My practice was almost exclusively defense for the first probably 15 or 20 years that I started, and was insurance defense work. For some strange reason, which I really can't explain, my practice sort of transitioned into business and civil type work. Mm-hmm. And in that kind of work, you're frequently on the plaintiff side as often as you are on the defendant side. But I'm primarily considered in my history as that of a defense lawyer.
Who were some of the great lawyers that you learned from working against them?
Well, the very best plaintiff's lawyer I ever had cases with was probably a lawyer you didn't know named John Herrick. John Herrick is now deceased, but he had a very good plaintiff's practice in Fort Worth and did a lot of workers' comp and personal injury case. And I had a number of cases with John Herrick, and he had the finest way with a jury of anybody that I've run into. And I've tried him against a lot of different plaintiff's lawyers, but he's not as renowned as some of them, but he had a way about him that was marvelous.
You had to take him seriously when you got that file in.
I paid him a lot of money.
Well, you know, the Fort Worth bar, when you got there, was it pretty collegial and everybody knew everybody?
It was very collegial, and it was very small at that time, and everybody knew everybody on a first-name basis, and there was no specialization at that time. Everybody did a little of everything, and people are still friendly in Fort Worth. We still stop and talk to each other on the street, but it's not like it was then. It was a small bar.
You had mentioned one particular mentor earlier, Mr. Crowley?
Alan Crowley.
Alan Crowley. Mm-hmm. You've since mentored some awfully good lawyers.
I have had some fine lawyers, fine young men that I've worked with.
Tell us a little bit about that role and your perception, having had a good mentor, how that changed your way of looking at working with young lawyers as they came up.
Well, I don't know whether I was as successful at it as Al, but Al was a great delegator. I mean, he wasn't the kind of individual who would keep everything to himself and only let you do little menial tasks. He shared the responsibility in the files, and I thought that was a wonderful thing to do. So I've always tried hard with the younger lawyers that I've worked with to give them some responsibility, and some responsibility early on, something that would be meaningful to them and help them advance themselves in their career. And maybe they'd stump their toe and learn, but you learn those lessons. That you don't forget those.
Sometimes we learn more from failure than we do success, I suppose.
But I'd say this, that if you ask one of those young lawyers, they would probably say that I was too critical. In fact, one of them told me once after he had given me a brief and I doctored it up a little, he said, "Kleber, I believe you'd rewrite the Bible if somebody presented it to you." So,
well, you wanted to make sure he knew you'd read it. You've had some interesting cases along the way. What was some of the work that you found most interesting, the kind of cases you got to work on?
One of the wonderful things to me about the practice of trial law is that there's such a variety. And I've been lucky in that you name it and I've tried it probably. I've been the equivalent of a general surgeon. I've been a general trial lawyer, and I've tried funny cases, I've tried serious cases, I've tried almost every conceivable kind of case. One of them that people today won't appreciate, but there was a James Bond movie called Goldfinger, and there was a couple in Fort Worth who had a little poodle dog, and they named it Pussy Galore
from the
Goldfinger character. And the neighbor had a large poodle dog, and the large poodle dog accosted the miniature poodle dog one day in the yard, and so the neighbors sued for rape, the poodle rape. And that was one of the funniest cases. And I defended the poodle for raping the Pussy Galore.
Well, did you actually have to try the case?
No. We were picking a jury. We got to the point of picking a jury, and the judge prevailed upon the other side to take the vet bills and settlement of the case. And
go ahead.
We went off. Another case I tried where in Stephenville where a babysitter was hired to look after a little child. And the little child on a tricycle ran into the babysitter, and the babysitter fell and broke her hip badly and was pretty seriously injured. And she sued the father for teaching the child to be a wild, reckless, and incompetent tricycle driver. Because they had a game where he would come home and they would play train, and the little kid would run into him with his tricycle and he would fall over. You know?
So the kid thought that's what he's supposed to do.
Kid thought that's what you're supposed to be, so he sued for training the child to be a wild, reckless, and incompetent tricycle driver. And about the time we were ready to go to trial in that, the father, who was a local funeral director, absconded with all the company's money and was never found. And so we never did get to try that one. That would have been fun.
He ran off with all his assets in case you got tagged.
So I could go on forever about the funny cases that I've been involved in.
Well, you know, that is one of the great things about trial work. Every case is different. Every person in every case is different. Who are some of the judges that you've gotten to work with that you really admire?
I would guess probably Judge Fisher Denny was one that I admired. Jack Langdon I admired greatly. Probably the finest judge I ever worked before was Charlie Murray, district judge in Fort Worth, who was given the Outstanding Jurist Award one year and was just a marvelous judge. He was good friends with the lawyers. He wasn't an aloof person. But when you walked in his courtroom, you didn't have a name or a face. You were just a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And he treated everybody just alike, even though he might have played golf with one of them on Saturday. And I'll tell you, I tried several cases out in your country before Pat Baskin, and I always thought Pat Baskin did a very good job in the trial of cases. And he was a friend of mine in school, so I'd known him for years and always enjoyed being in his court.
Well, we always enjoyed having you out there, too.
I was out a couple of times in Judge Bunton's court, and that was an experience.
Did he ever squirt water at you?
No, he never did, but he told us what kind of tie to wear that day, you know.
He's the only judge that ever told me to shut up and sit down, and guess what I did?
You did, that's right.
So, well, you know, the practice of law has changed a lot since you started. What would you say are the biggest changes from then? Because you're still trying lawsuits.
Yes. The biggest change is what I would call the lack of civility between trial lawyers. For some reason, we've gotten to the point where the younger lawyers don't appreciate the fact that you can be professional and friendly and get along with the other lawyer. You've got to always be in a fight and filing motions and trying to sanction people. And I think it takes a lot of the joy and the pleasure out of the practice of law to always be in a tongue war over some kind of problem.
I expect if you looked back, some of your best friends are actually lawyers you tried cases against rather than with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one thing that my good friend and mentor, Alan Crowley, he always said, clients have disputes, lawyers don't. That was a saying of his, and so that's where I learned that.
You know, we spend a lot of time, you've been active in the state bar and chairman of its board. We spend a lot of time worrying about that and trying to get back to the professionalism and civility. What do you think the answer is to that? What do you think are some things?
I fault the law schools on that. I think that the training programs in the law schools are so imbued with the idea of teaching lawyers how to handle a motion properly, how to know the rules, how to do all those things, that they forget to teach that you're a member of a great profession. You have an obligation to the public. You have an obligation to the system, not just to your client. You have an obligation that overrides those kind of things, and that you can be civil and nice without giving up one single right of your client. And in so doing, the system is better, the practice is better, the entire outcome is better. I think that all this new Rambo type, non-civil type, all it does is cause the clients money.
Which then in turn makes us all look bad because
Absolutely.
the system
And we
breaks
ought to
down.
look bad for that. I mean, we ought to do a better job than we're doing of trying to teach young lawyers that you can be civil and practice law and not give up a single right of your client.
You know, I know you have been in cases where lawyers weren't behaving because I've been in those cases with you.
Absolutely.
Does it change how you act if the other side's acting bad, or should it change?
Well, I'm human, and it probably shouldn't, but it frequently does. I mean, you often fight fire with fire, and but I think that if you can rise above it, that the kind of person that's doing that generally doesn't prevail.
I will tell you, my observation, for whatever it's worth, I've seen you do that and rise above it, and it seems like makes the judge like you better than the other guys. That been your experience?
I think it's true, and I think juries appreciate it. I think juries appreciate lawyers who are respectful and sincere and civil, and clients want you to jump all over somebody and tear them up. They don't appreciate that the juries and the judges don't like that.
How do you deal with that when you first take on a client? Do you visit with them about, this is how I do it?
I do frequently. It depends on the client. If a client comes to me and says, as I've had several of them say, Kleber, I know you're a nice guy, but I'm looking for a mean, mad dog. I'm in a fight here that the other side's going to be mean and nasty, and I want somebody that's going to be mean and nasty. And I try to explain to them that I think they've got the wrong attitude. But if that's really what they're looking for, they need to go find another lawyer. And I try to explain to them that I think you won't be served if you do that. Your interest won't be served. You'll come out the worse for having somebody getting down in the gutter and throwing slop with the pigs, and you're not going to come out that way. But if you want to do it, you need to go get another lawyer.
I guess there's worse things than not getting hired or even than getting fired.
I must say that as I got older and had enough business, it was easier for me to say that than when I was young and trying to get
A little more of a
business.
luxury than
That's right.
I understand.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk a little bit. You've grown up in the practice with at least early in your career, a robust jury trial system. Have you seen some changes in that?
Well, I've seen changes in the jury system, but I believe as strongly today as I did when I first started that juries try to do what's right. They always, throughout my entire career, I have believed that juries try to do what's right. And I think they very honestly take their duty and their responsibility very seriously, and they want to come out with the right result.
What do you think we would be giving up if we continue to move away from jury trials?
Well, I think we'd be giving up the very essence of our judicial system as we know it today. It's founded on the jury system. I've handled matters before judges. I've handled matters before administrative agencies. I've handled matters before government people. The warts on those systems are so much greater than the warts on the jury system that there's no comparison in my mind. And I can't conceive of what a system would be without the right to have a jury decide disputes among people.
Well, I know besides a busy trial practice and what continues to be a busy trial practice, you also have a family. Can you tell us a little bit about your family life?
Well, I married a girl from Austin, Gail Shelton, and we have 3 boys and 3 grandchildren, and they all live in the Fort Worth neighborhood. One of our sons has a little business of his own where he takes care of swimming pools. Another son is with Alcon Laboratories, and our third son is a computer consultant on SAP software for large companies. And so we still have a very close family.
You enjoyed that grandfather business?
about 2 hours at a time.
That's the nice thing about it. You can
Get it.
say, come get them.
Get them dirty, feed them everything their parents don't want them to have, spoil them, and give them back.
You know, one of the things I think that people talk about that may be changing as well, how do you balance family life with work life when you do have you're in great demand, people wanting to hire you?
Well, I've always believed that my family was important to me. I worked hard. I worked long hours, but I always made time for my family. I always made time for my boys. And I've always had a lot of other interests in the practice of law. And it's been kind of my experience that the people that are the busiest have the most time. Mm-hmm. And that the guy who sits around wringing his hands and saying, I don't have any time to do that, isn't doing very much.
Right.
So it just seemed to work out.
What are some of the things you like to do besides try lawsuits?
Well, I like almost anything that's outdoors. I play golf. I'm an avid trout fisherman. I bird hunt. I like to go to sporting events. I love to play games. I occasionally get in chess and checker tournaments. And I always had time to go fishing with my boys. All three of my boys grew up learning how to fish. And so I've always had a lot of activities other than just working.
Kind of keep your head clear, give you some perspective.
Well, there's one thing about it, you get away from the clutter and the telephones ring. The worst thing that's happened is these people that take cell phones with them when they go out fishing or on the golf course or something.
I'm with you.
I don't take mine, and I get away from things when I do that. So,
you know, besides practicing law and raising a family, I know that you have been active in your community and in the profession. What is it? Why do you think it's important for a lawyer to give back to the community he lives in?
Well, I don't. First, I think that that the practice of law is a wonderful profession. I think it got to be a great profession because it did more than grub for a living. I think it got to be a great profession because you look back in history and you look at great leaders who were lawyers. They gave of themselves to the community. You'll find lawyers with leadership roles in history in almost every human endeavor. And the more our profession tends to gravitate toward grubbing out a buck, toward spending all your available hours in the office, toward ignoring the responsibilities that I think a great profession has, I think you lose a tremendous amount of what has made the legal profession great.
What are some of the most rewarding things that you got to do for Fort Worth or the communities you live in?
I don't think I can pick out a single one. I think that everything that I've done, I've gotten more out of it than I put into it.
It's funny how it works that way.
It just seems to work that way. I mean, something that I took on thinking it was going to be a chore turned out to be very interesting, and somehow something happened good to me out of it. So there's not any one thing that I can single out that stands out to me as being particularly rewarding. It's rewarding to me that I've been able to do all of it.
Okay. You've been a leader in the bar. Did you do some work in the local bar before you became a state bar director?
Yes, I guess I've had every office in the local bar, including president, both the junior and the senior bar.
And did you do statewide junior bar work, what we now call the Texas Young Lawyers?
I wasn't as active in that.
Okay.
I was active during those days in the local bar, and I was active in 2 or 3 other specialty bar organizations.
I know that you served on the State Bar Board of Directors. What years did you do that?
About 77 to 81,
Okay, and you served as chairman then in 1980?
1979, 80.
79, 80. What were the hot issues of the day when you were?
Well, the hottest issue of the day was trying to get the bar through the first sunset process. We didn't know whether the bar was going to make it through the first sunset process or not, and it was touch and go right up to the last seconds of the legislature.
Right.
Other hot issues, we were just beginning the specialization program. We were trying to decide what to do with the grievance procedure. It needed some revamping. We had a very small general counsel's office then. Then the usual issues about trying to grow the CLE program. We were trying to pay for this building. We couldn't find a bank that would refinance the building. We were trying to decide whether to have an assessment or not, which we ultimately had. I can remember some pretty grim meetings with some bankers where they said, we're going to foreclose on your building.
Well, as one of the beneficiaries of your hard work, as we sit in this facility today, it must make you very proud.
It's wonderful, and it's been wonderful for the bar and wonderful for lawyers that we did that.
Yeah. What do you think are the greatest challenges facing our profession today? We've talked about the professionalism a little bit, and that's certainly one. But
well, I don't know that I'm any great philosopher, but I would say two that I can think of. One is the challenge of running the law practice as a business, but not being a business, still remaining a profession with an emphasis on providing service rather than selling a product. We don't sell a product. You don't sell a kit to defend somebody's right in the criminal court. That's a service that you render. But today, we're so imbued with the business aspect of it that we talk about the product that we deliver, and we don't deliver a product, we render a service. So to focus on the concept that we're a profession and keep in mind the importance of rendering service, even though we got to make a living and we've got to do it on a business-like basis, and we ought to, but we ought not to lose focus on this great profession. And a great profession has got to have high ethics, moral integrity, civility, and a high level of performance. And if we keep those in mind, we're going to be all right. So I think the other challenge that I think is primarily in the litigation area, I guess because I work in that area, is how to make legal services affordable. I think they have gotten to the point to where small businesses, which are the heart and soul of most of the legal practice, they can't afford to be in litigation. It's a bet the company process just to get sued, the fees and the cost and what's involved, the time involved. It turns all of those people against the judicial process and the legal profession, and I think that's why we're losing on that, is because we haven't learned how to give those people some predictable outcomes and services at a fair fee.
We have legal services to the poor, which is always with us, but we have really that big middle class that is losing access to justice as well.
They're the people that really get hurt. The big companies, the rich people, they can afford lawyers. The poor people get free services. But the great middle class, when they get involved in legal matters, it's terrible. It's a terrible imposition on them financially.
Have you had a chance to give some thought to changes we could make, or that we ought to at least be studying to make?
I wish I was smart enough to know that. I don't know the answer to that.
it's you know, with the inflation and hourly rates and everything else, it really is almost to where you can't afford to take a case unless it has a lot at stake.
I think it's going to have to involve a rethinking of discovery, a rethinking of the kinds of the way we handle lawsuits, a rethinking of how to get to the ultimate position of justice, or we're going to lose the legal system. We're going to lose it to arbitration. We're going to lose it to somebody who decides to resolve disputes some other way that's not nearly so good, just the way we lost title practice, income practice, doing real estate contract practice, because the lawyers wouldn't learn how to do it efficiently and cheaply.
You know, I couldn't help but listen as you were talking to Charles Smith about your early days when I think you said you'd be set in 8 counties on Monday morning.
Yes.
And you'd have a stack of files, but they would all be thin.
3/4 of an inch thick.
Okay. What do we do? Is that one of the biggest changes you've seen? I know I've had some files with you that we had to carry around on dollies.
Yeah, now you go to the courthouse with a file cabinet instead of a manila folder. And I think that is a tremendous change. And you get hit with 200 interrogatories and a document production request 2 inches thick, and you go up and argue motions, and the judge has you up there on scheduling orders and all that sort of thing. And all of it, every single step along the way adds a layer of cost. And until we can peel away those layers of cost and get down to somehow ultimately deciding that issue, and maybe deciding that the system needs to understand that you can't handle every little dispute as if it were a $5 billion lawsuit and look under every rock and turn over every piece of paper, that ultimately justice requires that you come to an end, that you get this thing over with.
Kleber, I can tell from talking to you that you like to get up and go to work in the morning. Do you find the practice of law fun?
I've enjoyed every minute of it, and as I look back on my life, I think I lucked into the one thing that I really have enjoyed, and I can't think of anything else that I could have done that I would have enjoyed as much.
What do we need to do to make sure that it stays fun? What are some things we could do?
Well, I think we've talked about some of them, but I think it's an attitude, and I think it's an attitude that needs to be pervasive and pervade the profession. And I think it starts with the law schools. I think it next goes to the people that are mentoring young lawyers, and I think it's a need to show by example how lawyers ought to act and how they ought to treat each other. And I think young lawyers probably learn more from what they see and what they're involved in than what anybody tells them.
You know, you brought up young lawyers. If you had a chance to, and I know you do in your firm, because I know young lawyers come to you for advice, what advice do you give them about how to project their career out into the future?
Well, the first thing I tell them is that if you have decided to practice law in order to make money, quit right now and go in the oil business or go into some other business. If you are interested in helping people and helping and being involved in work that's challenging and interesting and that will expose you to every conceivable kind of problem in society, then you're going to love being a lawyer. But you need to learn to work hard. You need to understand that you're not God's gift to the world, and that your clients don't always have to do what you tell them to do, and that your job is to try to help them solve their problems, and you're not the ultimate decision maker of what they ought to do. You find somebody who comes and hires you that knows a lot more about their business than you'll ever know, so don't start trying to tell them what to do. Help them through their legal problems and give them legal advice and work together with them as a team. And you'll come out of it not only being happy and pleased with what you've done, but you'll make some good friends out of your clients, and you'll have loyal clients all the rest of your life. But if you're in it just to make money, quit now.
Kleber Miller, it's been a pleasure to know you and
Thank
get
you,
to talk
sir.
to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.